You've been lied to about the car that actually beat Ferrari first. The man who quietly convinced it into existence? Ken Miles, the same British racer Hollywood made you feel sorry for. And Ford spent years trying to pretend this car never happened. And the proof is sitting in a museum right now while Hollywood told you a different story. Everyone says Shelby was the genius who greenlit the Daytona. Wrong. He only said yes after this stubborn British racer kept shoving the truth down his throat. This is the real story of how a crazy kid's aero idea, a crashed Cobra chassis, and one relentless British test driver quietly created the first American car to humiliate Ferrari, while Ford was busy chasing a different dream. And when the Daytona started winning, Ford wrote a contract clause to kill it. The same Ken Miles they turned into a tragic hero in the movies was the guy who secretly built the car that actually beat Ferrari before the GT40 ever did. And Ford wrote it out of history. Act 1. The Secret Setup. Unknown to most of the crew, Shelby had already flown to the UK on Ford's behalf. He was there to look over Eric Broadley's Lola Mark VI, a sleek mid-engine design that Broadley believed would be perfect with a Cobra 289 stuffed in the back. Ford was so interested they were already talking about buying the design outright and turning it into the GT40. For Shelby, this was the golden ticket, the contract to prepare and race Ford's official Le Mans contender. That's why, when a young designer named Peter Brock walked into the shop with sketches for a front-engine Cobra Coupe, Shelby wasn't exactly enthusiastic. Pete Brock: I'd tried for some time to convince Shelby that my concept, based on some then-unknown German aero data from the mid-1930s, would be faster than any GT in the world. We could build it inexpensively on the Cobra Roadster chassis because that car had already been built in the quantity required for FIA recognition. Brock wasn't just another dreamer. He had secretly designed the prototype Corvette Stingray for Bill Mitchell at GM, but he had never told Shelby. He'd been hired mainly to run Shelby's race driver school, hoping one day to drive for the team. His idea was straightforward but radical. Use the existing Cobra chassis for instant homologation under FIA Appendix J rules, add a sleek coupe body with cam-tail aerodynamics, and create a car that could be ready in weeks instead of months. But the shop's most respected voice wasn't buying it. Phil Remington, Shelby's chief engineer, genius fabricator, and right-hand man, thought the whole idea was crazy. Remington and Ken Miles had clashed years earlier over design details on the Reventlow Scarab, so tensions already simmered between them. And Ken Miles, the quiet, intense British ex-tank commander, had become Shelby's top development driver and one of the sharpest engineering minds on the team. Miles knew racing history. He understood what Mercedes and Auto Union had achieved with aerodynamics back in the 1930s. He didn't know the exact German data Brock was using, but he recognized a serious idea when he saw one. Shelby laughed at the coupe concept. Remington called it a waste of time. The crew, following Remington's lead, stayed mostly silent. Ford wanted zero distraction from the GT40 program. There was no budget, no official support. And Brock's idea looked like a direct competitor to the future Ford was betting everything on. To most people in the shop, the discussion should have ended there, but Pete Brock refused to let it die, and Ken Miles was starting to listen. What happened next would prove that sometimes the biggest breakthroughs start as the most unpopular ideas in the room. Act 2. The Secret Rebel Build. Pete Brock refused to give up. He kept pressing his idea on anyone who would listen. Shelby, Remington, and the rest of the crew. Finally, he drew up formal engineering plans and asked for a chance to present the entire concept to the whole shop. I asked if he'd let me make that presentation to the entire crew. Shelby conferred with Remington. Rem was still against the whole idea and told him it would be a waste of time. Shelby, caught between his desire for the big Ford contract and the quiet persistence in his own shop, reluctantly agreed. But he expected the meeting to end the conversation once and for all. The crew respected Phil Remington above almost anyone. If Rem said it was stupid, most would follow. The presentation landed with crickets. No one spoke up. Remington had already made his feelings clear, and the team followed his lead. Even Ken Miles stayed silent that day. He hadn't yet earned the crew's full respect as more than just a fast driver. Miles went back to Shelby privately. Twice. He told him the truth, and quietly convinced him Brock's idea would work. The main problem, Peter Brock recalls, with no chance of financial support from Ford because of its commitment to its GT40 program, building or even testing my coupe project seemed highly improbable. Still, Miles's certainty kept Shelby involved, even at the risk of personally alienating Remington, who had advised against it. Together with Ken Miles, Brock quietly stole a wrecked Cobra chassis, the one Skip Hudson had destroyed the year before when a flywheel exploded at Daytona. The chassis was still solid. They used Goodyear's secret tire test budget that Shelby had hustled during a lunch meeting with a couple of quick sketches. A new Kiwi kid named John Olsen, a true believer fresh off the plane from New Zealand, jumped in as crew chief. Two more welders and fabricators quietly joined the rebel crew, Jack Lane on alloy panels and Don Allen reinforcing the chassis for better stiffness. In the far corner of the shop, while the rest of the team rolled their eyes and focused on real work, this tiny group of 5 built the first Daytona Coupe. No top fabricators, no big budget, just raw determination on a crashed chassis using 1930s German comtail aero secrets almost no one in America had heard of yet. Act 3. The test that changes everything. On February 1st, 1964, they rolled the raw coupe out to Riverside Raceway for its first shakedown. Almost no one in the shop cared. Ken Miles climbed in anyway, and everything changed in 12 laps. Miles shatters his own previous Cobra Roadster lap record by 3.5 seconds, right off the trailer, with 0 major chassis tuning. On the long back straight, the car is pulling over 183 miles per hour and still climbing. He doesn't waste a second. He pulls in, runs to the track office phone, calls Shelby, and basically says, "We just built a rocket ship." Suddenly, the same guys who called it stupid are told, "This is now priority 1. The car everyone knew was impossible had just proven them wrong in the most public way possible. Just days later, the coupe debuted at the 1964 Daytona Continental. Dave McDonald puts it on pole. The car doesn't just compete. It immediately shows its teeth against the best GT machinery Ferrari, Aston Martin, and Jaguar could field. But here's the part that still blows minds. Act 4. Glory and Disaster. The Daytona Coupe's success finally convinced Henry Ford II that Shelby American could deliver results. In 1965, the long-awaited official contract to run Ford's GT40 program was signed. But part of the deal was a clear clause. Further development of the Daytona Cobra program had to stop immediately. Was Ford right to sideline the Daytona? Comment yes or no. Incredibly, Shelby's 6 Daytonas were almost scrapped at the end of the '64 season. At the last moment, the cars were loaned to the UK's Alan Mann racing team to let them quietly chase the FIA's GT World Championship, while Shelby focused entirely on the prototype class. While Ford poured millions into the mid-engine GT40, a crashed front-engine Cobra on stolen budget was already humiliating Ferrari. Miles was stuck in the middle of that famous photo finish controversy. But the car he and Peter Brock quietly convinced into existence had already won the World Championship the year before and was the fastest GT on every single track. While the Daytonas were setting lap records everywhere they ran, the early GT40s couldn't even finish a single race that year. The rebel car Ford never wanted was already outperforming the official corporate program. The 6 Daytona Coupes would go on to dominate its class in 1964 and '65. They delivered Ford the FIA World Championship, the first ever for an American manufacturer. And they did it while the Ford Le Mans program was still struggling. Everyone knows the GT40 was America's hero at Le Mans, but the Daytona Coupes had already crushed Ferrari in the GT class the year before. and Ford quietly stopped talking about it the second the cameras rolled on the photo finish controversy. Miles saw it coming. If this just flipped everything you thought you knew about Ford versus Ferrari, drop a like and comment Pete Brock below. I'll reply with the never-before-seen Riverside footage that Shelby himself never wanted public. So next time you watch Ford versus Ferrari and feel bad for Miles, remember this. He wasn't just the driver who got robbed at Le Mans. He was the man who believed in Peter Brock's crazy aerodynamic idea and made sure America actually beat Ferrari first. We would personally like to sincerely thank Peter Brock for contacting us and sharing such insightful information. This is Paul from Rare Car Stories. See you down the road.